He didn't move into the neighborhood looking for trouble. He followed the rules, paid his fees, kept to himself. Then one afternoon a knock came at his door. A neighbor's daughter stood there, phone in hand, smiling like the answer was already decided. "Your Wi-Fi is strong," she said. "I'll need the password." He said no, calmly, politely. That should have been the end of it. But in this neighborhood, no wasn't an answer they accepted. HOA emails began to arrive. Neighbors stopped waving. And then she made a call that changed everything. A call that brought flashing lights to his doorstep. Not because he broke the rules, but because he refused to give in. This is the story of how a simple boundary turned into a neighborhood showdown, and how staying calm exposed a system that had gone too far. Evan Carter moved into Maple Ridge Estates on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning most people forgot before lunch. The sun was already high, but the neighborhood felt strangely still. Manicured lawns frozen in perfect symmetry, identical mailboxes standing like quiet sentinels along the curb. Every house looked cared for. Too cared for. The kind of place where nothing happened unless someone decided it should. Evan noticed that immediately. He parked his modest sedan in the driveway of Unit 47 and sat there for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. He wasn't nervous exactly, just cautious. After everything he'd been through, caution had become a habit. Maple Ridge Estates wasn't where he dreamed of living. It was simply where he landed, close enough to the city for remote work, quiet enough to think, and affordable enough not to ask questions. The realtor had called it peaceful. Evan had learned that word often meant controlled. Still, peace was what he needed. He stepped out of the car, stretched, and looked around. Curtains shifted behind windows. Somewhere, a door closed softly. Someone was already watching. A man who kept to himself. Evan was not the kind of man who attracted attention. He was polite without being memorable, quiet without being strange. He waved when waved at, smiled when spoken to, and never lingered long enough to invite conversation. His life ran on routine: early mornings, black coffee, steady work hours, evenings spent reading or listening to quiet music. He worked from home as a systems analyst, a job that required focus, security, and, most importantly, reliable internet. That was the first thing he set up. Within days of moving in, Evan installed a high-quality router, upgraded his plan, and secured everything carefully. Strong password. Hidden network settings. Nothing flashy. Just dependable. The Wi-Fi network name appeared briefly on nearby devices. Carter_home_47. He didn't think much of it. Why would he? The HOA without a face. The Homeowners Association made its presence known before Evan ever met a single board member. On his second day, a thick envelope appeared in his mailbox. Cream-colored paper. Neatly printed labels. The HOA logo embossed at the top. Inside were rules. Pages and pages of them. Lawn height specifications.
Trash bin schedules.
Approved exterior colors. Window coverings. Parking restrictions. Noise guidelines. Guest limitations. Even recommendations on porch decor. Evan read them calmly, one by one. He had lived under stricter conditions before: leases, landlords, contracts. This was nothing new. He complied without complaint, filed the papers neatly in a folder, and moved on. What he didn't see yet was the unwritten rules. Those took longer to reveal themselves. Marilyn Cole. Marilyn Cole had lived in Maple Ridge Estates for 15 years. She was not officially the HOA president, at least not anymore, but titles mattered less than influence. And Marilyn had plenty of that. She knew every rule, every loophole, every fine. Neighbors listened when she spoke, nodded when she frowned, and avoided her driveway when possible. She had perfected the art of polite authority, the kind that smiled while reminding you she could make things difficult. Her daughter, Brianna Cole, lived with her. 22 years old. Loud where her mother was controlled. Impulsive where Marilyn was calculated. Brianna treated the neighborhood like an extension of her childhood home. Familiar, unquestioned, hers. When Evan moved in, Marilyn noticed. When Brianna noticed his Wi-Fi signal, everything began. The first knock. It happened on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Evan was mid-conference call, headset on, notes scribbled neatly beside his laptop. His home office was spare, desk, chair, bookshelf, nothing personal on the walls yet. He liked it that way. Then came the knock.
Sharp.
Confident. Not rushed. Evan muted his mic and checked the time. He wasn't expecting anyone. The knock came again. He sighed softly, stood, and walked to the door. When he opened it, a young woman stood on his porch, phone already in hand, eyes flicking briefly past him into the house.
Hey, she said.
You're the new guy, right? Evan nodded.
Yes.
Can I help you? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes.
I'm Brianna.
I live over there. She gestured vaguely down the street. Quick question.
Sure.
She held up her phone. Your Wi-Fi's really strong. Like really strong.
Mine keeps dropping.
Can I use yours? The question landed heavier than it sounded. Evan blinked once, processing. I'm sorry, he said carefully. I can't share it. Her smile faded instantly.
What?
Why not? It's for work. I need it secure. She rolled her eyes slightly. It's just Wi-Fi. Everyone shares around here. Evan hesitated. He hadn't heard that. But even if it were true, it didn't change anything. I'm not comfortable with it, he said, still polite. Her expression hardened. Wow, she said. Okay. Neighborly. She turned and walked away without another word. Evan closed the door and stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Something about the exchange lingered, not fear, but unease. Whispers begin. The next morning, Evan noticed small changes. A neighbor who had waved before now looked away. A car slowed slightly as it passed his driveway. At the community mailbox, two women stopped talking when he approached. None of it was overt. None of it was obvious. But Evan had always been observant. That afternoon, another envelope appeared in his mailbox. This one thinner. Inside was a welcome reminder from the HOA, friendly in tone, but pointed in content. A highlighted line stood out. Residents are encouraged to foster a cooperative and community-oriented environment. Encouraged. Evan exhaled slowly and filed it away. The second request. Brianna didn't knock the second time. She waited for him outside. Evan was taking his trash bins to the curb when she appeared, leaning casually against her car. Hey, she said. So, I talked to my mom. Evan paused. Okay. She said neighbors here help each other. That's kind of the expectation. I understand, Evan replied. But my answer hasn't changed. Brianna scoffed. You're really making this a thing? I'm setting a boundary. She laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. You know the HOA doesn't like people who don't cooperate, right? Evan met her eyes calmly. I follow the rules. She smiled slowly. We'll see. That night, Evan sat at his desk, the house quiet around him. On his laptop screen, a new email waited unopened. Evan stared at it for a long moment before clicking it open. And for the first time since moving in, he wondered if silence had ever truly protected anyone. The email from the Homeowners Association sat open on Evan Carter's screen long after the words had stopped making sense. He read it once, then again, and then a third time, slower. The message was polite.
Carefully so.
There were no accusations, no outright demands. Just phrasing, soft, deliberate phrasing, designed to suggest rather than state. We've received a concern regarding community cooperation. While no rule violations have been identified at this time, the board encourages residents to remain mindful of shared values. Shared values. Evan leaned back in his chair, fingers resting lightly against his temple. Nothing in the HOA bylaws mentioned Wi-Fi. Nothing mentioned personal internet access, shared networks, or obligations beyond common areas and property maintenance. Yet the message felt heavier than a warning. It felt like a spotlight. The subtle shift. Over the next few days, Maple Ridge Estates changed its tone toward Evan. It wasn't dramatic. There were no confrontations. No raised voices or angry notes taped to his door. Instead, there was distance. A man who used to jog past Evan's house every morning now crossed the street. The woman who watered her plants at the same time Evan checked his mail adjusted her schedule. Conversations stopped when Evan entered shared spaces. The silence grew deliberate. And silence, Evan knew, could be louder than any argument. Marilyn makes her presence known. Marilyn Cole chose a Saturday morning to introduce herself properly. Evan was trimming a small hedge near his porch when he heard a throat clear behind him. He turned to find a woman in her late 50s, posture straight, sunglasses perched just low enough to make eye contact without removing them. "Evan Carter," she said. "Yes."
I'm Marilyn Cole.
"I live at Unit 32. Evan nodded. "Nice to meet you." She smiled thinly. "I'm sure you've received our welcome materials," she said. "And our reminder email." "I have."
Good.
"Then you understand how important community cooperation is here." Evan waited. He had learned that silence often encouraged people to reveal more than they intended. Marilyn gestured vaguely toward his house. "My daughter mentioned you weren't very helpful when she asked for something small. I wasn't comfortable sharing my internet access," Evan said evenly. Marilyn's smile tightened. "It's just Wi-Fi," she said. "You're not losing anything." "I disagree." Her sunglasses came off. "This neighborhood thrives because people don't make things difficult," she said. "We handle issues internally." Evan met her gaze. "I'm not creating an issue." Marilyn studied him for a moment longer, then replaced her glasses. "Let's hope it stays that way." She walked off without another word. The HOA notices multiply. The next HOA message arrived on Monday. This one referenced neighbor relations. The next referenced shared resource expectations. None of them mentioned Wi-Fi explicitly. None of them cited specific bylaws. But the pattern was unmistakable. Each message suggested Evan was failing in some undefined social duty. Each message implied consequences without stating them. Evan printed them all. He dated them, filed them, documented everything. He had learned long ago that paper mattered. Brianna pushes harder. Brianna stopped pretending. She began appearing wherever Evan happened to be, near the mailboxes, by the trash area, at the edge of the community walking path. "Seriously," she said one afternoon, falling into step beside him. "This could all go away if you'd just share the password." "I've said no," Evan replied calmly. "You know my classes are online, right? I know there are other options."
She scoffed.
"You just like control." Evan stopped walking and faced her. "This is my home," he said. "My work. My connection." She leaned closer. "You're going to regret being this stubborn." Social consequences. By midweek, Evan felt like a ghost in his own neighborhood. The HOA Facebook group, which he had joined quietly when he moved in, buzzed with vague posts. Some people don't understand what community means. If you can't be neighborly, maybe you don't belong. No names were mentioned. They didn't need to be. Evan muted the group. Doubt creeps in. At night, alone in his quiet house, doubt began to whisper. Was he being unreasonable? Was this really worth attention? He replayed conversations in his head, examined his tone, his words. Every time he arrived at the same conclusion. Boundaries were not cruelty. The first formal warning. The envelope this time was unmistakably official. Bold text. Reference numbers. Legal phrasing. Notice of community non-cooperation. Evan read slowly. The HOA claimed multiple residents had expressed concern about his lack of engagement and refusal to support reasonable requests. No fines yet. Evan folded the letter carefully and placed it in his growing folder. Then he stood, walked his router, and checked his security settings. Everything was exactly as it should be. That evening, as Evan settled into work, his phone buzzed. A notification from his doorbell camera. Motion detected. He opened the feed. Brianna stood on his porch again, this time with someone standing just out of frame. Someone older. Someone official-looking. Evan's heart rate remained steady. But his instincts told him the situation had crossed a line. The doorbell rang once.
Clear. Firm.
Patient. Evan Carter stood in his home office, watching the live feed on his phone. Brianna Cole remained on his porch, her arms folded, weight shifted confidently to one hip. Beside her stood a man Evan did not recognize, tall, neutral expression, clipboard tucked under one arm. Evan did not rush. He had learned that urgency often benefited the person demanding attention, not the one responding. He closed his laptop, straightened his shirt, and walked to the front door. When he opened it, the man stepped forward first. "Good evening, sir," he said. "I'm Officer Daniels. We received a call regarding a concern at this address." Evan nodded politely. "What kind of concern?" Officer Daniels glanced briefly at Brianna before answering. "A report of suspicious behavior and refusal to cooperate with neighbors." The words hung in the air. Evan felt them, not as fear, but as disbelief. "I'm not sure I understand," Evan said calmly. Brianna smirked. A conversation framed carefully. Officer Daniels maintained a professional tone. "May we speak inside?" Evan considered it for half a second, then stepped aside. Inside, the house was quiet.
Clean.
Unremarkable. Nothing about it suggested urgency or danger. The officer took in the scene quickly. "Sir," he said, "we were told there may be an ongoing issue regarding internet access and potential interference." Evan raised an eyebrow slightly. "Interference?" Brianna spoke up. "His Wi-Fi keeps blocking mine, and he refuses to help." Officer Daniels turned back to Evan. "Is that accurate?" "No," Evan said. "My internet is private. I don't interfere with anyone else's service." The officer nodded slowly. "Do you have any devices that intentionally disrupt nearby networks?"
No.
"Have you denied emergency access or prevented communication?"
No.
Brianna crossed her arms tighter. "You're missing the point." Officer Daniels looked at her. "I'm trying to understand it." The emotional undercurrent. As the questions continued, Evan felt something shift inside him. Not panic. Not anger. A quiet realization. This wasn't about Wi-Fi. It was about pressure. About power. About forcing compliance through embarrassment. He answered every question calmly.
Clearly.
Without defensiveness. The officer's posture softened. "Sir," Officer Daniels said finally, "there's no violation here." Brianna's expression faltered. "What do you mean?" "I mean private internet access isn't a shared utility. There's no requirement to provide it." Brianna opened her mouth, then closed it. "But the HOA," she began. "The HOA doesn't override personal property," the officer said gently. Silence followed. Neighbors watch. Evan noticed the curtains. One by one they shifted. Doors cracked open slightly. People were watching. This was no longer private. Officer Daniels turned to Evan. "You've done nothing wrong." "Thank you." "We'll note the call was unfounded." Brianna stiffened. "Unfounded?" "Yes," the officer said. "That means there's no issue requiring follow-up." He nodded politely and stepped outside. Brianna lingered. "You think this is over?" she said quietly. Evan met her eyes. "I think it never should have started." She left without responding. The aftermath begins. The next morning, the HOA email arrived early. Subject line: Incident clarification. The message claimed the association was seeking clarity regarding an unnecessary escalation involving outside parties. Evan read it slowly. The language had changed. Where once there had been suggestion and pressure, now there was distance. Defensiveness. Someone was trying to rewrite the narrative. Marilyn tightens the grip. Marilyn Cole called for a community check-in meeting. Attendance was framed as optional. It never truly was. The meeting was held in the community center. Folding chairs, long table, the HOA logo projected on the wall. Marilyn sat at the center. Brianna sat beside her, arms crossed. Evan took a seat in the back. Marilyn spoke warmly about unity, about misunderstandings, about outside involvement. Then she glanced at Evan. "Some situations are better handled internally," she said. "When individuals don't cooperate, it creates unnecessary attention." Evan raised his hand. The room stilled. "Yes," Marilyn said tightly. "I was approached repeatedly about sharing private internet access," Evan said. I declined. That's all that happened. Murmurs rippled. Marilyn smiled thinly. That's one perspective. Evan nodded. It's the accurate one. A seed of doubt in the crowd. A woman in the front row shifted uncomfortably. A man frowned. The tone in the room changed. This was no longer a lecture. It was a fracture. That night, Evan received a certified letter. Inside was a notice of formal HOA review. Reasons cited. Disruptive conduct affecting community harmony. Evan placed the letter beside his growing stack of documentation. For the first time, he allowed himself a small, calm smile. They had escalated. And now, they had left a trail. The certified letter sat on Evan Carter's kitchen table long after the envelope had been opened. He didn't rush to react. That was the first thing he did differently. In the past, Evan might have felt compelled to explain himself immediately, to prove his innocence to people who already seemed determined to misunderstand him. But something about the wording of the notice, its careful vagueness, its refusal to cite a specific rule, told him this wasn't about resolution. It was about pressure. And pressure, Evan had learned, worked both ways. Reading between the lines. He read the notice again, this time not as a homeowner, but as an analyst. Disruptive conduct affecting community harmony.
No dates. No incidents. No violations referenced.
It wasn't a charge. It was a suggestion disguised as authority. Evan opened his laptop and created a new folder. He labeled it simply.
Document son.
Inside it, he placed every email, letter, and notice he had received since moving in. He scanned physical copies, saved screenshots, recorded dates and times. Then he began reading the HOA bylaws, slowly, carefully, line by line. What the rules actually said. The bylaws were dull.
Dry. Dense.
Most people skimmed them once and forgot them. Evan didn't. He highlighted sections about private property rights, shared utilities, limits of HOA authority, proper procedures for issuing warnings and fines. What stood out wasn't what the HOA had written to him. It was what they hadn't. There was no requirement to share personal services. No authority to mediate private disputes unrelated to common areas. No allowance for using HOA processes as leverage in personal disagreements. Evan sat back, absorbing the implications. This wasn't just intimidation. It was misuse. Patterns emerge. Over the next week, Evan observed quietly. He attended HOA meetings without speaking. He listened. He noticed patterns. Marilyn Cole spoke often, confidently, decisively, framing her opinions as consensus. Others deferred. Few questioned her. When someone did, she redirected smoothly, returning control to herself. Brianna attended when she felt like it, always seated near her mother, always involved in side conversations that halted when others looked over. And every time Evan entered a room, Marilyn's tone shifted, subtle, but unmistakable. He began noting that too. The first crack. The HOA scheduled Evan's formal review for the following Thursday evening. He prepared. Not with speeches. With facts. He organized his documents chronologically. He printed relevant bylaw sections and highlighted them carefully. He wrote a simple timeline of events, no opinions, no emotional language. Just dates. Actions. Responses. The night of the review, the community room was fuller than usual. Curiosity had spread. Evan took his seat near the front this time. Marilyn opened the meeting with practiced warmth. We're here to discuss a situation that has caused discomfort within our community, she said. Evan raised his hand. Yes, Evan, she said, smiling tightly. I'd like to clarify which bylaw I'm alleged to have violated, he said calmly. Silence. Marilyn blinked. Well, she said, it's more about behavior than specific rules. Evan nodded. Then perhaps we can review the section on enforcement authority. He slid copies of the bylaws across the table. The board members leaned forward. Marilyn did not. The room shifts. As Evan spoke, he did not accuse. He explained. He read excerpts aloud. He referenced dates. He described interactions without adjectives. When Brianna interrupted, he paused until she finished. When Marilyn tried to redirect, He returned gently to the text. The effect was subtle, but powerful. People stopped looking at Evan. They started looking at Marilyn. Uncomfortable questions. A board member cleared his throat. "Marilyn," he said, "did we approve these notices?" She hesitated. "Well, as acting liaison, that's not an official role," another member said.
The air changed.
This wasn't confrontation. It was realization. After the meeting, no ruling was made that night, but no action was taken against Evan either. The review was adjourned pending clarification. As people filtered out, a neighbor Evan barely knew approached him. "You handled that well," she said quietly. Evan nodded. "I just read what was written." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's enough." Marilyn reacts poorly. The following days were tense. Emails went unanswered. HOA notices stopped arriving. Then, suddenly, a new message appeared in the community inbox. Subject: HOA process update. The tone was defensive. Overly detailed. Corrective. Marilyn was backpedaling. Evan saved it. The truth spreads quietly. Whispers changed direction. Where once people avoided Evan, now they asked questions. Casual ones. Careful ones. What really happened? Was it about Wi-Fi? Did the HOA overstep? Evan didn't gossip. He simply said, "I followed the rules." And let silence do the rest. Late one evening, Evan received an unexpected email. From HOA Board, no Marilyn CC'd. Subject: request for private discussion. Evan read it once. Then again. This time, he smiled. Not in triumph. In relief. Because truth, once seen, could not be unseen. The email arrived just after sunset. Evan Carter read it slowly, not because it was long, but because it was different. There was no passive language.
No suggestion. No implication.
It was direct. The HOA board requests a private meeting to discuss recent events and clarify concerns raised during the last review. No mention of community harmony. No reference to cooperation. And notably, no Marilyn Cole copied. Evan closed his laptop and sat back in his chair. For the first time since moving into Maple Ridge Estates, he felt something settle in his chest. Not victory. Stability. The private meeting. The meeting took place in the same community room, but the atmosphere was entirely different. The chairs were arranged closer together. The projector was off. The room felt smaller, more human. 3 board members sat at the table. Marilyn was absent. Evan took a seat across from them. "Thank you for coming," one of them said. "We want to start by acknowledging that mistakes were made." Evan listened without interrupting. "We allowed informal authority to influence formal processes," another board member admitted. "That was wrong." They apologized. Not dramatically, not publicly, but sincerely. What was decided? The board explained their findings calmly. The notices sent to Evan were procedurally invalid. The call involving outside authorities was deemed unnecessary. HOA authority had been misapplied for personal disputes. Corrective steps were already underway. Marilyn Cole had been removed from all advisory roles. HOA processes would now require full board approval and written citations. Evan's record would be cleared entirely. "Is there anything you'd like added to the record?" one board member asked. Evan considered the question. Then he said, "Only that boundaries matter." They nodded. Marilyn's fall from influence. The neighborhood noticed the change quickly. Marilyn still lived at Unit 32, but the invisible shield around her had vanished. People no longer deferred automatically. Questions were asked. Her emails went unanswered. Brianna stopped attending HOA gatherings entirely. The power they once wielded so effortlessly had evaporated, not through confrontation, but through exposure. The apology that came too late. One afternoon, Evan found Marilyn standing at the edge of his driveway. She didn't smile. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said. Evan listened. "I was protecting my daughter," Marilyn continued. Evan nodded slowly. "I was protecting my home." She had no response. And that, Evan realized, was enough. The neighborhood rebalances. Slowly, Maple Ridge Estates found a new rhythm. Conversations returned. People waved again. The HOA Facebook group became quiet, practical.
No bagay accusations.
No public shaming. Just announcements. Rules. Structure. A small symbolic change. One evening, Evan logged into his router settings. He stared at the network name for a long moment. Then he changed it. From Carter_home_47
to
private_network. He smiled faintly and logged out. The final reflection. Months later, Evan walked through the neighborhood at dusk. The lawns were still perfect. The mailboxes still aligned. But the silence felt different now. It felt chosen. Evan had not won by being louder. He had not fought back with cruelty. He had simply stood still while others revealed who they were. And in doing so, he had reclaimed something more valuable than comfort. He had reclaimed his peace. Final line. Sometimes the strongest response isn't confrontation. It's clarity.